There's a common misconception out there, which is that texturing means grunge, and that's simply not the case. Of course, you can use textures to create kind of a grungy look to your images, to create a faded or vintage look, torn and tattered, and that's totally fine. But textures can also be used just to add a little bit of extra dimension, a little extra kick to a photo. Now, generally when we're doing that, we do want to work a little bit more on the subtle side. We want to make things a little bit more, well, not so heavy-handed when we're doing these kind of texturing. That way it's not super noticeable. You don't want to see the image and say, oh, that's a great texture over that image. You just want to see an image and say that's a great image. Now here we're going to be working on this file right here. This is a raw file. It's exercise file number 7. And this is actually one of the images that we shot in the newborn workshop collection. So let's go ahead and process this photo. And in the next video, we're going to get onto actually texturing it. Now, the reason why we want to process these photos prior to texturing is because I feel like texturing is really part of the overall vision, and processing needs to be involved in that. You don't just necessarily throw a texture over an image that's already done. You kind of incorporate both. So what I have envisioned for this image is a nice, bright and airy image with a subtle texture that kind of enhances the overall wood feel that we see in the background. Let's go ahead and process this. I'm going to get started right here, and we're going to be using the newborn preset pack that's in the newborn workshop collection. Now again, if you don't have these presets, no problem. We're going to go through all of them just after we finish the overall look. I'll go through all the settings so you guys can follow along. Let's go ahead and just use the standard import color, and then what I'm going to do is just kind of create, I'm going to flip through these fades and just see what toning I like the best. And I think I'm going to like the kind of cooler toning for this image. So let's go ahead and leave it right there. I'm going to bring the exposure down just a titch. And I always say titch. My guys here, they always bug me because I say certain words over and over. But I'm going to bring up the temperature a little bit. Let's bring it up to around 5600 Kelvin. Maybe 5800 is good. So 5800 Kelvin, -4 tint, and just the regular preset. That looks totally fine. So we have this nice, bright and airy look. Let's take a look at the actual settings and see what's going on here. So we already went over the temperature and tint. For the basic settings, we have an exposure of 0.3. We've reduced contrast to -25. We have highlights and whites that are dropped to -40 and -30 respectively. Now this adjustment right here, combined with our clarity adjustment of -20, is really softening up the overall contrast in the image, and this gives us a much flatter look, which is very flattering for skin tones. Now below that we have -5 and -5 on vibrance and saturation, and this is kind of to help us to kind of just get a little bit softer colors in the skin tone, so we don't have those strong yellows and reds and so forth that you'd sometimes do in newborn skin. Okay, going down on the tone curve, we have this nice little lifted S-curve. So you'll notice that we've dropped the highlights over here. We've raised the, dropped the whites. We've raised the highlights though, and then all the way through to the shadows. Everything is lifted above that midpoint line. So here are the actual points that you can see. Now what this is doing is adding our overall fade. And if I turn this on and off, you can see exactly how big of an impact it's having. Because this is also a cool bright fade, we're adding a little bit of cool tones over here in the blues as well. So you can see in the reds, we're dropping the reds a little bit, we're dropping the greens a little bit, and we're adding the blues, and that gives it the overall cooler look to the image. And combined with our temperature settings, we get this nice kind of pure white look. Okay, so that's the tone curve, which is doing a lot of our magic right there. Let's go to the HSL. With HSL, we do have a little bit of adjustment under saturation of -20 in red and -10 in orange. Once again, this is to flatten out those stronger colors in the skin tones. We don't have any split toning being added. We have our standard detail adjustments of 70, 1.5, 10, and 30. Noise reduction is at 30. Again, this is a small amount that helps us to kind of flatten out the pores in the skin without basically kind of reducing or killing detail everywhere else. So we're reducing a little bit of the skin detail, but it's not at the cost of other detail. Okay, so it's just a small amount. Little shortcuts like this help a lot when you're processing a lot of images. Although for, if you're doing just one single image, you want it to be absolutely flawless, then you'd probably do all of the skin work inside of Photoshop and not use any shortcuts whatsoever. But I like shortcuts. They save time, and most of the time they're not really noticeable. All right, let's go under lens corrections. We have a standard amount of 30 and 30 for the midpoint. I'm actually going to drop this to 0 because I do want a subtle kind of darkening around the edges, and that's totally fine right there. Okay, so that's it. We don't have any other effects or anything else going on. We're ready now to take this image into Photoshop, where we're going to begin processing it. So let's go ahead and hit Control-E or Command-E on a Mac. This is going to load it right into Photoshop, and let's go on to the next video where we're actually going to drop in and add our textures.